Hello guys and welcome to my new video, and today we'll be looking at Restoration Druids in Shadowlands. And of course, I kind of wanted to have some alpha background in this video, but unfortunately I'm part of that hashtag no alpha club, so we'll just be looking at tooltips. But this video hopefully is going to provide some decent overview of where Blizzard is heading in terms of Restoration Druid changes, in terms of the new talents, in terms of new spells, in terms of Covenant abilities. And basically we'll have a little discussion, a little prediction discussion, very early prediction discussion in terms of, is Blizzard heading the right direction in terms of healer balance? How is the damage reduction cooldowns of other healers is going to affect the fact that Resto Druids don't have damage reduction cooldowns? And how are they going to deal with the powerhouse that Resto Druid was in BFA in terms of Mythic Plus? So first of all, let's have an overview of some of the spell changes in terms of Restoration Druids. Now again, it's not mentioned here, but all of the Druids in general are going to get Stampeding Roar, which was previously available to Guardians and Feral Druids, and this was an insanely strong utility tool, group movement speed boost, especially in raid situations. And you'll probably see a lot more of these speed boosts available in Shadowlands because all of the Druids are going to have it. So maybe Ferals and Guardians are kind of looking at balance and rest, and they're like, do they need extra utility from Stampeding Roar? Especially Feral, who a lot of the times was brought in just because of Stampeding Roar. They might be a little bit jealous, but again, Resto Druids are getting a lot of extra utility by getting Stampeding Roar. Bark Skin duration has been reduced a little bit. Efflorescence mana cost has changed from 21% to 17%. So Efflorescence was already insanely efficient spell, and it's looking to be very strong in Shadowlands as well. And we'll talk about some of the talent changes, what's happening to Efflorescence, but Efflo is just overall strong. In terms of Innovate, and again, the selfish MadSkillz does not like this change. I'm gonna have to share my Innovate now. If cast on somebody else, you gain the effect at 50% effectiveness. So basically, Innovate is going to be far more efficient to share your Innovate with your other healers. And my Innovate is macroed just to be cast on myself. Overall, additional utility to Resto Druids in raids, but you're gonna have to share it and you're gonna get 50% effectiveness. Again, you could say that it's a plus because Resto Druids getting more utility. You get to share your mana reducing cooldowns with other healers, help them out and things like that. So generally speaking, a pretty welcome change. The selfish people will not like this. Ironbark is really interesting. So this is a big huge change, especially in Mythic Plus. So basically Ironbark is getting Stonebark talent baked into it, increasing healing from your heal over time or HOTS effects by a certain amount. So basically if you use Ironbark on a target and you already have HOTS on them, aka tank, they're going to heal for more. But the cooldown changed from 1 minute to 1.5 minutes. So this is pretty big because a lot of other healers would be very envious of Resto Druid's damage reduction cooldowns in terms of tanks because Ironbark was so short. A lot of the times you rather have a very short cooldown that you can basically use every second trash pack pull on a tank to reduce the damage intake rather than having like a 4-minute cooldown that's extremely strong. Especially in Mythic Plus because you get a lot of the trash packs that are really, really hard. So generally speaking, the increase to the cooldown is pretty big, but the fact that it's now Stonebark or giving you extra, healing from HOTS is kind of welcome. So generally speaking, I think this is a good change in terms of what Blizzard is trying to do. They're trying to not make Resto Druid Ironbark too overpowered in Mythic Plus. I can see where they're coming from, and I think other healers, when looking into Resto Druids, they'll be like, yeah, finally they're getting a longer cooldown on this, especially Resto Shamans who just don't have a tank damage reduction cooldown outside of Spiritling. They are getting Earth Shield, but that's something else. Life Bloom cost change from 11% base mana to 8%, so it's more efficient. Nature Swiftness is another new spell, which is not super exciting in my opinion. It's just your next Regrowth, Rebirth, Untangling Roots is instant, free, castable in all forms, and heals for an additional 100%. Now this is really cool because spot healing. They're trying to battle the spot healing issues of Resto Druids. A lot of the times, if a person is 10% HP and you don't have Swiftment available, you're kind of like, okay, let's hope the HOTS are going to do their work. I'm going to cast Regrowth. Let's hope they're not going to die in that time. Now you're going to have Nature Swiftness on 1 minute cooldown, which is going to increase your Regrowth's healing by a big amount. So this is kind of helping the spot healing issues of Resto Druid. Again, a welcome change, 1 minute cooldown. It's not super exciting, but it's going to help out Resto Druids when they really need that spot healing. Regrowth also is getting a really interesting change here. Regrowth's initial heal has a 40% increased chance for critical effect if the target is already affected by Regrowth. That should say Regrowth hot. So what this basically means, and it makes absolute sense, if you're spamming Regrowth on someone in Mythic Plus or in raids, you know basically that they're about to die because you have used all their HOTS or used all your HOTS on them and there's nothing else left but to spam Regrowth. So basically, after you cast your second regrowth, regrowth is gonna have an increased crit chance, making it a lot stronger. And you can see that Blizzard again, if you need to spam regrowth, it's going to be extremely efficient because of the extra crit chance, it's going to crit and things like that. And there's abundance, or abundance talent is still present, and we'll talk about Resto Druid talents later on. But you can see where Blizzard is going. If you're spamming regrowth, let's make it stronger if they have the hot on them. In Mythic Plus, this is probably going to be a very welcome change to help with that. You have to remember, Shadowlands, at the start of Shadowlands, your stats are going to be a lot different. We're looking at like 5% haste, 10% haste maximum. We're looking at really low stats. Everything's going to be a lot slower. The crit chance is going to be a lot less. So things like that, or regrowth's initial crit buff after you cast it on a person that already has a regrowth hot, is going to help out, especially in the early stages with spot healing and tank healing. Besides that, you can see a rejuvenation cost change from, it's actually been nerfed from 10.5 to 11, so it's going to cost a little bit more. This is not really that interesting. Sunfire Swiftman, this is huge. In my opinion, this has potential to change Resto Druid gameplay, and I hope it will. So basically, Swiftman consumes a regrowth, wild growth, or rejuvenation effect to instantly heal an ally. So this is going to be at the start of the Shadowlands. People are going to be like, what the hell? A person was 10% HP and I tried to press my Swiftman and it didn't work. The game is bugged. What's going on? What am I doing wrong? Basically, if someone needs that spot healing from Swiftman, you need to make sure they have a hot. If the person has a hot, then you can cast Swiftman. That's the way it used to work before. So it's going to be really hard to get used to for some people. It's not like before. Swiftman was just, hey, I don't have to think about applying hots. I'm just gonna heal when healing needed. And now you're going to have to make sure that people have hots on them if you want to use Swiftman. Because of this nature, or the change of the talent's mechanics, you're getting a lot of benefit out of it because it's going to consume a hot. Cost change from 14% base mana to 8%. Mana cost has been drastically reduced. And cooldown changed, this is the big one, from 25 seconds to 15 seconds. This is really, really big. This has a chance of making Soul of the Forest also viable, and we'll talk about that later on in the talent section. But overall, this has a big potential, especially in the early days when you don't have that many mastery percentage or mastery stats. We'll see how this is going to work out in basically the talents. Tranquility has been increasing 41%. Again, I kind of would like to see Tranquility to be castable on the move, but I also understand why Blizzard doesn't want that to happen. But I feel like Resto Druid, is the healer on the move, and Tranquility you have to cast standing still. But that's something else. Wild Growth change here, where it says it only affects 5 targets, but then rank 2 heals for an additional 1 target, basically means nothing. It's kind of unchanged, except for the cost. It went down from 28% mana to 22, which means that it's, again, Wild Growth is an extremely, well, it's looking to be a very solid spell to be used alongside with like things like Efflorescence, and generally speaking, a solid AoE heal. Now in terms of talents, let's look at some of the changes that are happening to Restoration Druids, and you'll notice some changes and some new talents coming in, and some of them are kind of interesting. And let's talk about, again, Abundance is still making an appearance. Abundance is still here. It's going for each rejuvenation active. Your growth cost is reduced by 6%, the critical effect chance is increased by 6. Now, the reason I'm talking about this is because you're getting Nourish. This is a new spell that you get as a Restoration Druid, and basically it used to be a PvP talent, but now it's going to be an additional heal that heals a friendly target for a specific amount and receives triple the bonus from Mastery, from Resto Druid Mastery. So basically, if you have a ton of hots on a target, this long spell, it's a long casting spell, is going to heal for a lot. Now, if you select Nourish, you're going to have 2 direct healing abilities. Also, you're going to have Nature Swiftness, which is going to make your, regrowth hit for a lot more. But let's look at this. Nourish is 16% base mana cost at 2-second cast time. 2 seconds is insanely long. You're going to have 5 to 10% haste at the start of Shadowlands. This is going to be an insanely long spell that's going to heal for a lot. Now, if you look at Regrowth, Regrowth is a 17% base mana cost, so 1% more, and it has a 1.5 second cast. So this falls into the whole class design of Blizzard, of having one fast, inefficient cast or heal with Regrowth and one slow, efficient heal with Nourish. This is what they're trying to kind of do. But what I don't really understand is that Regrowth with Abundance could do the same thing. If you have Abundance, if you choose to go with Abundance for whatever reason, and if you get enough rejuvenations. You have to remember that maybe abundance is going to fall short because with the low amount of haste that you're going to have, it might be hard for you to get a decent amount of rejuvenations out in the raid, because you have to remember, haste reduces global cooldown. Right now, Resto Druids are running with 20-30% haste, and they have tons of haste multipliers, and all of a sudden getting a ton of rejuves is quite easy. But with low amount of haste and no haste multipliers and things like that, it might be a bit harder to get a decent use out of abundance. But let's talk about this. If you spec into abundance, all of a sudden regrowth becomes quite efficient, because if you have more rejuvenations, the mana cost is reduced, the critical chance is increased, and also the fact if you cast multiple times on the same target, if they have regrowth hot on them, you also get 40% crit chance by default. So all of a sudden regrowth becomes a really efficient or pretty decent spell to use. And I'm not sure why you even would need Nourish. Don't get me wrong, I feel it's an interesting choice to have an additional spell. This is like Healing Touch. It's like, you know, if you had your keybinds for Healing Touch, this is going to replace your Healing Touch keybind. It's going to be a long spell that's going to increase your spot healing, but I'm not sure if it's fully needed at this point. I'm going to propose that they probably should have still have Prosperity, something that buffs Swiftmend, but maybe they could have went with something like Growth Tending. For the people who know what Growth Tending is, it's a very popular Azeroth trait in Mythic Plus. Swiftmend heals for additional target over. It basically puts a hot. Every time you use Swiftmend, it's going to put a hot on them. Maybe having a certain talent that's going to increase your Swiftmend is going to be better at this base level of talents. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if you needed two different spells. I'd love to hear your opinion about this, because I honestly feel if you wanted to have an efficient single target healing ability, you just spec into abundance. If you wanted to have a really or more powerful Swiftmend, this could have been Growth Tending. And if you wanted to have more tank healing through additional hots, but you don't want that, you know, direct healing from regrowth, you can go Scenario Ward. So I felt that could have been a better option. But again, love to hear your opinions on this. So then this is relatively unchanged. After this is very interesting. So Balance Affinity, what is going to be the best for Mythic Plus for raids in terms of DPS? Balance Affinity or Feral Affinity or Guardian Affinity. Now for the longest time, Feral Affinity was the way to go, but Balance Affinity was really not that far off from being a decent DPS option, even in Mythic Plus. But you can see here, the Balance Affinity right now gives you Typhoon. You're losing Typhoon as a default talent choice. You don't have Typhoon anymore. So if Balance Affinity is not good, you won't have Typhoon. But you're gaining things like Cyclone. You're gaining things like Mighty Bash if you actually want to spec into it. And if you go into Feral Affinity, you can see here Maim. Maim is looking to be pretty solid. Like, think about this. For the people who don't know what Maim is, it's a combo finisher that's also going to damage and stun the target. Now, if a target is stunnable, you could assume this as an interrupt. Of course, bosses probably won't be stunnable, so this is not going to really do anything. But on trash pack mobs, this has the potential to be really strong. So just look at some of the utility that Resto Druids are losing and gaining. They're losing to some extent Typhoon, but they're gaining Maim, and they're gaining Cyclone, and they're gaining possibly Mighty Bash. Now in tier 35, you can see here, you still have your Mighty Bash, you still have your Mass Entanglement. You don't have Typhoon, like I mentioned, Typhoon is baked into Balance Affinity, but you have Heart of the Wild. Now, what does Heart of the Wild do? It's a 5-minute cooldown. It's pretty substantial. Abilities associated with your chosen affinity, so that's very important, are substantially empowered for 45 seconds. So if I pick Feral Affinity, which let's say assume it's going to be the best one for Mythic Plus or raids or whatever, that means that the damage of your feral abilities is increased by 30%. Anyone who loves that kitty weaving, anyone who loves that DPS, is looking pretty juicy. All of a sudden, if you don't need that Mighty Bash, again, it's not a clear winner. Heart of the Wild is not a clear winner here, at least in my eyes. If you need that constant stuns, you can choose Mighty Bash. So all of a sudden, as the Resto Druid, now you have Mighty Bash, you have Cyclone, you have Maim. Pretty good in terms of utility. And if you don't need that Mighty Bash because you feel your group has a good amount of stuns, people are paying attention, people are interrupting, you can go Heart of the Wild and then pop it. If you can get a good amount of uses in a, let's say, 5-man dungeons, if you know when to use it, if you feel like, hey, this boss is not going to do a whole lot of damage, I can go full Feral Affinity, I can go full DPS, I can do a ton of DPS. Honestly, I love this tier, and I feel these choices here are pretty good in terms of what you want to achieve. I'm of course going to go with Heart of the Wild. I'm going to see if I can try and beat a DPS person by popping Heart of the Wild. I'm not sure if it's going to scale that well, but I'm gonna try, and I honestly really looking forward to Heart of the Wild right now, but I don't feel it's a clear winner right now. It really is going to depend on your group. Tier 40 is where I think it's really interesting because of the fact that Swiftman, like I mentioned before, Swiftman has like a 15-second cooldown, but it now consumes a hunt. This means that you're gonna have a lot more Swiftmans. This also means that if you pick Soul of the Forest, it might get a lot more value out of it. This might possibly mean that Soul of the Forest might come back as a viable choice in raids and Mythic Plus. And honestly, if there's one thing that might change for Resto Druids, I hope Soul of the Forest is coming back. I really, really do. I enjoyed Soul of the Forest playstyle immensely, and I hope it will have some viability, at least early in the Shadowlands, maybe before we get more mastery and things like that. Generally speaking, I really enjoy Soul of the Forest. I think the playstyle was really interesting. I know it's like Thunder Focus T for Mistweaver Monks and things like that, but I honestly felt that if I use my Swiftman, I can decide, do I need a really powerful direct heal from Regrowth? Do I need solid AoE healing from Wild Growth? A lot of the times in raid situations, you basically would use Swiftman into Wild Growth for extra AoE healing, but in Mythic Plus, you can decide. Maybe I need continuous AoE healing or continuous sustain healing from Swiftman and Rejuvenation on a time. I felt it was really, really interesting. And if there's one change that is welcome for me is Soul of the Forest coming back. So we'll have to see. In tier 45, there's a new ability you can see here. Stonebark is no longer here because Stonebark is kind of baked into it. You can see Overgrowth. Overgrowth is a PvP talent that's already existing. Apply Life Bloom, Rejuvenation, Wild Growth, and Regrowth's heal over time effect on an ally instantly. It's a 1-minute cooldown, but it has a 30% baseline cost or base mana cost, which is pretty substantial. Again, you had an option of getting this in BFA if you use the PvP essence as a major, and not that many people would actually use this because a lot of the times Resto Druids will go the DPS major in Mythic Plus or mana major in raids. So I'm not 100% sure if this is really gonna make a lot of significant impact. I still feel mastery stacking from Spring Blossoms is very strong. Maybe it will see some niche usage, especially because the mana cost is so high at this point. So we'll have to see. Again, not 100% certain on this. Maybe a different talent would have been more optimal, but we'll have to see if they're going to change some of the tuning around Overgrowth. And tier 50 is relatively unchanged with Photosynthesis, Germination, and Flourish, and it's kind of the same. So generally speaking, what's happening to Resto Druids in Shadowlands in terms of Mythic Plus and in terms of rating? Now, you have to think about this. The only way Resto Druids are not going to be good in Mythic Plus is if they remove Mastery or they change Mastery, or if they remove a lot of the utility abilities from Restoration Druids. The only ability that's being removed in terms of utility is Typhoon, and you probably might have this because you might replace this with Feral Affinity's Maim. You might still have Mighty Bash. You might be using Heart of the Wild to increase your damage as Feral or with Feral Affinity. So you're not really losing anything in terms of Resto Druid utility. You're gaining a lot of spells. You have Cyclone, you're Stampeding Roar. Your Mastery is still the same. You're still getting a lot of spot healing from additional abilities like Nourish from Nature's Swiftness. Swiftman might be, he has a shorter cooldown, so maybe, you know, Soul of the Forest might be coming back. We don't know this yet fully, but you can only see that Resto Druids on paper. There is no way that Resto Druid is not going to be great Mythic Plus healer because they're not losing anything. They're gaining a lot more abilities. Their utility was already strong. Unless they change the way that Mythic Plus works completely, or if they nerf all of the abilities from Resto Druids, I don't see how Resto Druid is not going to be an excellent Mythic Plus healer. At least with these initial changes. Now, in terms of raid, it's a lot different story. A lot of the raiding weaknesses of Restoration Druid in BFA were to do with the fact that they don't have passive DPS, were to do with the fact that they don't have damage reduction. Now, damage reduction, to some extent, is being changed by a lot of classes. For example, Holy Paladins or Paladins, all of the Paladin specs will have Devotion Aura. Devotion Aura has been kind of changed to give 3% damage reduction within 40 yards. So that's a passive damage reduction across the board for everybody in the raid. So you're probably going to need at least one Paladin, regardless of what spec, just to give that 3% less damage reduction. But with Aura Mastery, Holy Paladins are able to increase that, again, not 100% certain, to 15%. So instead of 20%, which was what the Devotion Aura with the Aura Mastery used to do in BFA, it's being reduced to 15%. But the passive effect of Devotion Aura has been significantly buffed. So you can still see Holy Paladins have damage reduction, or Paladins have damage reduction, and Holy Paladins with Aura Mastery have damage reduction as well. And Barrier from Disciplined Priest is still reducing damage by 25%. Now, Barrier is a lot smaller area, so you can see why it's so much stronger or so much more damage reduction. and to some extent you'll still have Spirit Link with damage reduction. So you can see where certain healers still have damage reduction, certain healers still have passive DPS, while Resto Druid is not really being, or there's not much in terms of addressing Resto Druid weaknesses in raid, and I really hope that's not going to be the case. Now, the only way I can see where Blizzard is trying to battle passive DPS is through Covenant abilities. Adaptive Swarm commands a swarm that heals or deals shadow damage over 12 seconds and increases the effectiveness of your periodic effects on them by 20%. Upon expiration, travels to a new target within 25 yards, alternating between friend and foe. So I felt this was looking really strong in 5-mans, regardless of numbers. I'm not looking at numbers at this point, but it's something that you put it on a tank if you need healing. It makes your HUD stronger. It jumps from a target to an enemy that's going to deal shadow damage, and it's going to make your Moonfire, Sunfire, and Bleed stronger. That feels pretty good. It's passive healing, passive DPS. It jumps from enemy to foe. Now, that felt pretty interesting, and I thought, is this going to be the only way that Blizzard is going to address passive DPS? Now, Convoke the Spirits, call upon the Night Fae for an eruption of energy, channeling a rapid flurry of 16 Druid spells and abilities over 4 seconds. You will cast Moonfire, Rat, Regrowth, Rejuvenation, Trash, unappropriate nearby targets favoring your course position. Now, this was insane. 16 abilities in 4 seconds. This is insane for Resto Druid, or it's looking to be insane for Resto Druid in raid scenarios where you can apply Rejuvenation on 16 targets in 4 seconds, followed by Flourish, or followed by Wild Growth and Flourish for extra mastery stacks. Feels very, very, very strong. Now, Kindred Spirit is being changed. Again, the initial view of Kindred Spirit was that this is going to be Symbiosis, and it's not looking like anything like Symbiosis. Nothing like this. Forms a bond with an ally. Every 1 minute, you may empower the bond for 10 seconds, granting you an effect based on your partner's role and granting them an effect based on your role. So it's kind of like a reverse kind of deal. Now, every 1 minute is a short cooldown, and for 10 seconds. Now, I'm assuming, again, I can't really fully test this because I don't have the alpha, but I'm assuming that, let's say you're a healer and you're going to bond with a damage dealer. So as a healer, once you press this ability once every minute for the next 10 seconds, focus on your bonded partner, replicating 50% of the healing that you deal onto them. So basically I press it and then I heal everyone else, and 50% of that total healing is being placed into my bonded target. And now, because I'm bonded with a damage dealer, because I'm using this ability, energize your bonded partner, granting them 1 primary stat for every 50 damage that you deal. Remember, stat squish, so 50 damage is a decent amount of damage. So basically, they're going to be dealing damage, and the more damage they deal, I'm going to get intellect back. So it's an interesting kind of ability that's going to be based on who you're going to be bonded. And again, there's a different kind of effect if you bond with a tank. Very interesting, very hard to determine if it's going to be good or bad at this point. Again, the last ability, Ravenous Frenzy. For 20 seconds, Druid spells you cast increases your damage, healing, and haste by 2%. Stack it. If you spend 1.5 seconds idle, the Frenzy overcomes you, consuming 3% of your health per stack. Again, this could be a pretty big initial health loss. Stunning you for 1 second and ending. Like, again, it's somewhat similar to something similar to what ERT was, but instead of mana, it's gonna take health away. It's pretty interesting in terms of it keeps you casting and things like that. Again, I don't feel it's really battling what Resto Druids were needing in raids, which was like damage reduction and passive DPS. Again, certain healers still looking to have that passive DPS and damage reduction, which we'll see how important that's going to be, because maybe there's going to be a lot of rot type of fights. If there's a rot type of fight, damage reduction has less, or it has less potential for being mandatory. But again, I don't think Blizzard is gonna make the next raid with like 8, 9, 10 bosses having all rot type of healing needed, which is going to be insane. So I feel that the first impression of these changes is that there's no way I can see Resto Druid not being good in Mythic Plus with the amount of changes they're getting. Harv the Wild, getting extra spot healing, Swiftman might bring back Soul of the Forest. There's no way. It just feels really good by just reading these initial tooltips. In terms of raiding, if the same healing methodologies are going to persist, you need healers with passive DPS, you need healers with damage reduction, then I don't see how Resto Druid weaknesses are being addressed in raids. So I hope that I get to do a bit more testing in terms of what the raids are going to be like. Do you need those damage reductions? Do you need those passive DPS to meet the DPS checks? Or is healing going to be insanely mandatory? Maybe the healers that have passive DPS, the healers that have damage reduction, their healing is going to be substantially reduced. let's call it damage reduction, passive DPS penalty. And Resto Druids are going to do more healing because they can't really do damage reduction. We'll have to see, but overall I feel the changes are interesting. I see that Resto Druid is still going to be a fun healer in Mythic Plus. Not a whole things are changing. This video was insanely long. I really apologize for this. Again, thank you guys for watching this insanely long video. I hope next time I'll have some alpha footage to back up some of my testing. Right now it's just initial thoughts from reading some of the tooltips, some of the changes. Resto Druid is still looking very interesting. They're still looking, at least first initial thoughts. There's no way they're not going to be good at Mythic Plus. I don't see how. But we'll have to see how they're going to be doing in raids. Thank you guys for watching this video. If you like the content, please do subscribe, and I'll see you in my next guide.